adolescents are wired to be impacted more by peers than during any other stage of development. Peer influence, as any adolescent parent will know, is disproportionate and paramount. And so we really leverage that in this really positive way to allow them to also support and mentor one another through the process, because there are messages that they hear from their peers that they won't receive the same way from us, from our team, or from their own parents.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Finding New Waters. My name is B. Reeves. I'm the Director of Business Development here at New Waters Recovery in Raleigh, North Carolina. Got a very, very special guest today, friend of mine and friend of the program, Elizabeth Fikes. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you.
Well, it's thank you for being here, number one. Number two, it's great to see you again, even though it's just over camera. But we were just together in Mississippi. Where are you right now?
I'm in Oxford, Mississippi.
Oxford, Mississippi. So I will let you tell everybody what y'all do, but Elizabeth is with Stonewater Recovery. Tell us what you do. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, so I am the co-founder of Stonewater Adolescent Recovery Center in Oxford, Mississippi, and we are a residential treatment program for adolescent boys ages 12 to 18 years old. It's about a 90-day program, 2 to 3 month program, and it's for those struggling with anxiety, depression, substance use, trauma, working on the whole family system.
Well, I can attest that I've been there twice. Um, Elizabeth and her brother Brian, co-founder, um, have an amazing event that I've been privileged and honored to be able to attend the last 2 years, the Waverly Invitational, where we come down and we do a series of dinners, but most importantly, we do a nice tour where they really, and I mean, I'm probably guilty of this myself because I'm so worried that people, yeah, they want to come see New Waters, but they also want to go do all the other stuff they're doing here, that I probably skimp a little bit on the actual, nuts and bolts of the program and the tour. And you do not do that. You're very thorough. So we appreciate that.
For better or for worse, even if you're hearing it second time. Thank you for
Well,
being
we
willing
need to
to
hear it.
show up and be present and hear some of those things a second time.
Absolutely. Well, tell us how, because there's something that stood out to me, and I'm sure I heard it last year, but it stood out to me this year when you said the worst day of my life was the day Brian went to treatment, which I'm would only hope that turned out to be the best day too, eventually. But tell us about that and how, the inspiration, how it got started.
Yeah. Well, my family is from Mississippi, and we have always been a really close family. My parents are, I think the best parents anyone could ask for. And my brother and I have always been really close. And when he was about 16, we saw that he was struggling, probably a little bit before that. But once he turned 16, really saw that he was struggling. And we're pretty blindsided by it because we had not really looked in the right place to identify the problem. We thought, this just must be a teenage boy, or this is kind of adolescence. And we have an older sister. And so this was the first boy, and he was the baby. And we just thought maybe these are all kind of normal developmental changes. And so maybe didn't take the microscope to the problems or the root of the problem quite as closely as we could have now, of course, with that 2020 hindsight. But so by the time that we did find out that he had a really serious substance issue, it was very progressed. We didn't have the opportunity to try outpatient therapy, try intensive outpatient therapy, try these other interventions. It was really life threatening at the time that we found out about it. And we worked with a third party, a consultant for our family, who helped us find a program, find it quickly, help us with how to get him there. Um, Adolescents in treatment are very different than adults in that they are not often willing. Sometimes you get willingness, but a lot of times they aren't willing, so it's a different dynamic. And so, he was willing for about 24 hours, and then when the rubber really met the road, was very unwilling, and so we had to navigate that, and, he went to a 90-day program followed by a year long of, a step down program, a therapeutic boarding school in his case, and has celebrated over 20 years in recovery, and counting, and it's something that our family really celebrates together because it impacted each of us so profoundly, and not just the time leading up to treatment and the time that he was in treatment, but that time post-treatment, and 20 years ago, families were not really being brought into this process. And so we're specifically passionate about that piece, really getting families involved. And back to your question, sort of how we were inspired to start Stonewater, it was through that journey. And we're so thankful for the resources that we had. And we also saw some opportunities to incorporate some other things like purpose and the family system in a very different way. And so that was sort of the original inspiration, just helping other families exactly like us.
Yeah, I love it. And I feel like rightfully so, a lot of the attention on the story of the origin story is focused on Brian's addiction and his getting to treatment and getting sober and getting better. Like what were you doing with your life at that time and what was it like for you when all that was happening with him?
Yeah, I don't get asked for that question very often. I was living in France at the time and working there. Like I said, I'm older sister, and so at first I was a little far removed from it. He lost privileges due to some, kind of normal events according to what he was involved in at the time, to go on his normal spring break plan. And so
Hmm.
instead, my parents allowed him to come visit me, and I was so excited about having my brother come visit me, getting to show him my world there, and it was a disaster. It was, really illuminating, I would say, to me, um, and, what I chose to report back to my parents in terms of maybe the severity of his problem. And then, yeah, I mean, it was so hurtful. He had just become a different person, and that was so hard because he would say things that were so mean. He would say them to me, he would say them to my parents, and all of those things were just not him. And that was the hard part as a sister, is like watching him turn into a different person and not knowing exactly why. And then when you started to see some indicators of why, not knowing how to help. And it's just a helpless feeling, I think, as family members, not having the right tools. And also, you'll see glimpses of him coming back, and then you use those teeny tiny little windows of normalcy to say, "Oh, he's fine. Maybe we're just overreacting. Maybe everything's okay or not as bad as we thought." And so it's kind of that up and down roller coaster of second guessing yourself and second guessing the problem. How did this happen? I know my parents really felt like, what have we done wrong as a parent? You look for that, where to put the blame, how did we get here?
Yeah. Well, I know from my own experience, as the Brian in this scenario of my family, there were some times, especially in that last year, especially just the last 3 or 4 months before I went to treatment, I was so mean to my mother, my brother, the people who love me the most and I love the most. I mean, it's like, you know, I don't I wasn't setting out to do that, but it's like we know the closest we can kind of hurt the easiest, I
Yeah.
think is probably the best way to describe it. When you're talking about how, he was younger, way younger than most people, period, but way younger than I was when I got sober, but still, just remember I was talking to I did kind of what you're doing now. I was the guest on a podcast a while ago, and I remember I was talking about how my parents I had great have great my dad is deceased, but I've great had and have great parents. And on some level, my dad was just like, he'll get it together, and collectively they were kind of like that too. But my mom over time was more like, he's got real problems. Like my dad was always, he'll grow up, he'll get it together. And it
Yeah.
sounds like there was a little bit of that. But the funny thing is, it did happen for him and for me. It just didn't, was not the avenue anybody expected for
Yeah.
either Brian or me, I'm sure.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up about the dads because people view dads as a quick sort of, authoritative decision maker in the home, and often that is true, but what we see often is that when parents come to us, the mom is resolute, she knows that this is necessary, and the dads are the ones that still really wanna try and fix it themselves. It's harder for them to relinquish that control to someone else, and I thought that that didn't describe my parents. I thought that my parents were really in lockstep the whole time, but because we were seeing this dynamic so frequently with the families that we work with, I last year, so we're talking like over 20 years into the process, I asked my parents to both write a letter to a prospective parent who was considering residential treatment for their son, not Stonewater, having nothing to do with our program, but just generally. And to write a letter to, for my dad to write a letter to dads, my mom to write a letter to moms, what would you say? And I did not allow them to talk to each other, before they did this, and so they couldn't collaborate. They just had to do it as they remembered it 20 plus years later. And what I got back was this letter from my dad, which kind of struck me to the core because he was saying all these same things that I hear dads saying now. He knew it was a problem, but he minimized it for a long time. My mom was, seeing it on a more ground level. He was, working, traveling a lot for work. And so he was, to some degree, also thinking that maybe my mom was exaggerating on how bad it was or what needed to be done. And so she really had to work hard for a long time to finally get him on board. And just like what you're describing with your parents, and that rings true today as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, but it's funny how those kind of, I don't know if the stereotype's the right word here, but yeah, I mean that pattern where the typically more resolute and authoritative are the more hesitant in those
Mhm.
in these situations. I was, when you were doing your presentation, one another thing that stood out to me this time was you said we have a dress code here, and I think it's slap pants and a button down shirt. And a lot of these moms and dads too, I guess, when they're getting the packing list together, they say, "Well, he always wears joggers and a hoodie." And you're like, "Exactly, yeah, and get him these clothes because that's what they wear here."
You can say
And that's
that.
it's a big deal.
It is because our program is not just about treating the substance use or treating the mental health. Those are, of course, fundamental and so important. And we work hard to get diagnostic clarity on those mental health things that are going on. But there's this other part of it that people don't talk about as much, and it's the confidence piece, the loss of purpose. These guys are kind of floating now and they're not living into all these things that they're so good at. These guys are so smart and they're so talented, and really, they've lost so much confidence and self worth. And part of that is the way that we show up. And I think it's not just on parents. Socially, we've really changed the bar on what we're expecting from teenagers, right? What we're expecting in school, what we're expecting in their extracurriculars, and how they show up to those. And so we're pretty unapologetic of saying, you can bring joggers and you can bring hoodies, and when the environment is appropriate, the situation is appropriate, you can wear those. But when we're going off campus, when we're presenting in other ways, there's also a different dress code for those things. When you're sitting in group, It's not about sitting there and slouching. The way that you build confidence is also the way that you carry yourself. And you deserve to carry yourself that way because you're so smart and because you're so talented and because you're so capable. But they don't believe that when they come in. And so it's important for us that they learn that. They're not going to learn it overnight, but through all these little kind of micro habits that they start to develop with us, they really start to walk taller. And sometimes I think these guys have grown 6 inches while they're with us, but it's just carrying themselves differently.
Yeah. That's cool. I mean, and it serves just the dress code part can serve a multitude of purposes.
Yeah,
There's self-respect, carrying yourself better, a little bit neater, um, but also just kind of like not getting your way all the time
yeah,
too?
yeah,
I mean, that's a big thing. I mean, I remember when there's a person in our field who one time told me we were just talking about like work stuff and she was upset about something. And I was like, what happened? She goes, oh, I just didn't get my way earlier. And she was being funny about it, but she's in AA sober 14 years. I mean, it's being funny about it, but it's also true. It's like, I mean, there's a pamphlet that I got in treatment called King Baby. And I remember reading that like, oh my God, I was 41 years old when I got, so I was reading this and I was like, this is me. I'm just a big baby. And it goes back to that, like, not getting our way. And that
yeah.
sounds extreme and juvenile, and it kinda is, but that's kinda like what it's all about is, like, we don't always get our way, and how are we gonna react to that?
Well, and for us too, it's not just the teenager receiving new forms of accountability. It's also the parents. We find that parents are less and less capable when they come in of knowing that their child is going to experience discomfort. It is going to be uncomfortable at first for them to be far from home. Our families come from all over the country, some, from Hawaii to Alaska. That's hard as a parent to be so far from your child. And then to imagine that they may be uncomfortable at first because they're in a new environment and they're being exposed to new things or, doing therapy, which is uncomfortable. I mean, I still get uncomfortable in groups and, I
Mhm.
think that, that's what we've seen too is not just a lack of resilience with the kids. They're resilient. They can build that. They don't have a lot of it when they come in, but we see that they can build that pretty quickly. But also parents just having a really hard time trusting the process and allowing them to be uncomfortable for just a little bit, while they ultimately heal.
Yeah. One thing you said at the beginning of this, I wanted to kinda go back to, just that adolescent treatment is very different from adult treatment, and will you just talk about kind of some of the nuances, maybe the big differences and the small differences?
Yeah. Well, like I said before, the first one kind of out of the gate is that adolescents don't typically sign up for treatment themselves. And so there's a lot of people that say, if they don't want it, it's not going to work. And that's just not the case with us. We see adolescents every day that came in not thinking that they needed at least residential treatment. They may kind of concede to their parents that they need outpatient treatment and that they're willing to go to therapy, but they're not yet at a point where they're saying I need residential treatment. And that's different. And there because of, adult treatment, there are a lot of people who are often advising them that if your child doesn't want it, it won't work. And so then they're questioning their investment. They're questioning, is my child going to hate me forever if I make this decision? Is he ever going to talk to me again? Is he going to be traumatized by the experience? And and the answer is no. If you get to the right program, if you listen to your gut as a parent and know that you're doing this to save your child and that they're not in a place right now where they can make healthy decisions for themselves, then you're doing the right thing and you just have to commit to it. So that's the first kind of hurdle, is getting the parents to kind of come to a place where they can make that decision without their child's buy-in. The second would be once they get to us, because we don't have their buy-in, we have to work on it, you know? We have to be creative about the ways that we get their engagement. There are a lot of things that we do at Stonewater that from the outside looking in, you would say that has no therapeutic value. And we would say the therapeutic value of having a regatta where they build a boat and race it across the lake, or have an entrepreneurial program, or have a talents and gifts initiative. We would say those are all backdoor entries to therapeutic engagement when we don't have that right away from adolescence. And then, like I said, the
Yeah.
the other biggest one is really just the involvement of the family, because most adolescents are gonna be going back to their home. They're going to be going back to some type of academic environment, and so we also have school. Obviously, a lot of adult programs are not incorporating school. We do it not just so that we can check boxes that they're going to school, but also so we can see what stressors exist in the academic environment, because if we don't, then they're going back to school, and there's an 8-hour blind spot that we didn't even address because we don't know what school feels like for them. They may be really smart, but process information differently. ADHD, social anxiety, and school is a minefield. And if we don't do that while they're in treatment, then we miss identifying all of those things that exist that we need to work on to give them tools to reintegrate.
Something that I, s noticed last year and y'all talked about and then kind of stood out this year is you have I think you call him the headmaster?
Yes, headmaster. Mhm.
So they have you have a headmaster, and his job is to coordinate with all the respective schools where the different boys have come from, correct? To make sure that
Right.
they stay current with their what a job. That's amazing.
It is. We have a value that is challenge the box, and he really has to challenge the box and get creative with um, how much work can be done in the residential treatment environment, how we can make the most progress possible, but also a lot of wins we see first in the classroom, because that is an area that they miss having wins. Like I said, these guys are smart, and a lot of them were performing really well in the classroom, and then little by little are either in the process of uh, withdrawing from that, or have long withdrawn from that engagement in a meaningful way. And I think part of it too is once they start to see it tip a little bit, they have that, well, if I don't try, I don't fail. Failing is
Mhm.
uncomfortable, but if I don't try, it's not as bad. And so they just start to really disengage from school, and so that's tough. And also, like I said, our headmaster needs to see the kind of stressors that exist and be able to collaborate with the clinical team on how best to equip them and the family and the schools on that transition after Stonewater.
Yeah, that's amazing that that can be done and I mean, that guy's job, I don't envy his job. But that's really cool that y'all I mean, that's but you're right, I mean, yeah, that would be just taking somebody that age out of life and getting better in so many ways, but having, like you said, that 8-hour blind spot would be, sending them back to the wolves even, like, maybe even in worse shape in a different way than when they came in. But back to your point too about that myth that we've gotta be ready and want it, like, I hear that all the time. We hear that all the time. And the way I look at that is, in a perfect world, somebody comes to, in this case, mom and dad or mom or dad, and the boy says, I am really struggling. I need help. I want help. I'm at my rock bottom. What do I do? I'll do anything. Let's do it. I mean, that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it might, but I mean, I wouldn't count on it, And even as with adults, I mean, it's so rare that it even happens with adults,
Mhm.
and it's there's that whole thing about faking it till you make it,
Yeah.
just doing the work. I mean, that like, my own experience was like, I didn't wasn't my idea to go to treatment. I went, I didn't wanna do it, and while I was there, I just participated.
Yeah, like, from a neurodevelopmental perspective, adolescents a healthy adolescent who isn't using substances or isn't struggling with mental health issues, they still lack the neurological development that really attaches consequences to action. It is in the process of developing. And so boys are going to be in a different place than girls. Ages are going to have an impact. Genetics are going to have an impact on so many different neurological factors and physiological factors in this process. And so even the healthiest adolescent is gonna struggle to not feel a little bit invincible. And so, while adults, it's difficult to get them to that process, maybe just because emotionally they're not there. With adolescents, we're combating nature also. So that's and every parent
Mhm.
would love to sit before their child and be able to say, "Hey, I love you and I'm worried about you and I'm out of my depth here, and I can't help you the way that I know you need to be helped. And so I've found a place that can and has people that are going to be able to give you the tools that you need, and they're going to give us the tools that we need." That would be lovely if after the end of that conversation, the child would then say, "You know what? You're right. I love you too. Thank you so much. Let's go." But
Yeah.
they don't do that, and that's what we wanted as a family. My brother did. He told us that he would never talk to us again. He told us that if he had children, we would not have a relationship with them, and he really meant those things at the time that he said them, you know, and that was really hard to hear because you're terrified that that is what's gonna happen. But the beautiful thing is that when they start to get healthy and you start getting your brother back or your child back, that relationship is better than you ever even could have imagined it would be. And so that's what we really try and help families understand is we know how it feels. We've been there. Like you said at the beginning, that is to date the worst day of my life, having, watching my brother go to treatment, and like you said, it's also in a way the best day, um, in that it really started us all on this journey, and a one thing that I thought of earlier when you were talking is, as a sibling, no one said to me, "This is impacting you. This is trauma for you." And so I wasn't equipped with any tools myself, and, 10 years into my brother's recovery. I was living in New York at the time, and I went to a movie with friends, and there was, someone who was using substances in the movie and kind of had derailed his life. And I just started having what I know now is almost like a panic attack. I convinced myself that my brother was in a gutter somewhere, that he'd relapsed. So I leave the theater, I start calling him on loop, he's not answering, and so with every call he doesn't answer, I go further down that spiral of believing that he's relapsed. I'm calling every family member, they're not answering. So, I could not withdraw myself from this downward spiral until I finally, which in my case was, about 30, 45 minutes later, talked to someone who could tell me that he was okay, everyone's okay. But I didn't have a single tool. I didn't know any breathing techniques. I didn't No one had ever said to me, "This has impacted you and this might happen. This is PTSD, and it may show up today or it may show up 10 years from now, but you need tools." And so, my message to families is always make sure siblings are taken care of in this process too, that they're brought into it, that they're educated on it, other family members who are impacted, make sure you get tools that you need also.
I'm so glad that you not that you had that experience, but that it led to you, embracing the tools and this I feel like almost every episode of this podcast, this comes up in one way or another about how families so often, if they do are presented with any kind of help for themselves, so often they think of it as some kind of punitive thing
Mhm.
where
Yeah.
like in your case, like, well, my brother was the one who was burning it all down. Why do I have to do this? And it's like, this isn't, it's to help you, and people get to find their own recovery and serenity through without having to be the one who was the addict or the alcoholic.
Mhm. Yeah, it's just so important, and it's a big part of our program, and I think there are also messages. So we have part of the therapy that our families do is with other families, both families that are in our program currently and families that are, years down the road. And that's so powerful because there are messages that a parent hears very differently from our staff than they hear from another parent. And there are times when I hear a parent, we've said the same thing 5 times, 5 different ways, and they're not hearing it, and then they'll hear another parent say that same thing, and the light bulb comes on, and they say, "Oh, that's a great idea. I love that." And that's fine with us, like, however
Yeah.
whatever it takes for you to hear it. It's the same way with our guys. Adolescents are wired to be impacted more by peers than during any other stage of development. Peer influence, as any adolescent parent will know, is disproportionate and paramount. And so we really leverage that in this really positive way to allow them to also support and mentor one another through the process, because there are messages that they hear from their peers that they won't receive the same way from us, from our team, or from their own parents.
I love how you don't care how they get that or, accept that information because, it'd be tempting to be like, "Well, we've been telling you that the whole time."
No, no, I told you so's here, just as
Right,
long as you
exactly.
got the message.
Yeah. So, Stonewater right now is residential treatment for up to you tell us and tell us what you're also adding.
Yes, so 12 to 18-year-olds, we can take 18-year-olds, outright, kind of depending on states. They may not always be able to, but a lot of 18-year-olds are still living at home. They're still in school, and it's really much more appropriate for them to be in an adolescent environment than in sort of an 18 plus environment. And so we love that we get the opportunity to treat 12 to 18-year-old boys and just all the dynamics that come with that and the way that they can support each other as peers. Like I said, peer impact is a huge part of our program. Um, they are coming with, anxiety, depression. The substance use is one thing, trauma, PTSD, even suicidality. In many cases, the guys might have a misdiagnosis. A lot of our guys come in with ADHD diagnoses, and the parents are just kind of beating their heads against a wall because they tried medications and they don't work, or they've tried these other things and they don't work. And what we find is it was actually anxiety presenting as ADHD, or um, trauma presenting as ADHD. And then some of the guys do truly have an ADHD diagnosis, and we want to make sure they have the right supports in place. So our program is really focused not just on the progress that they're going to make while they're on our campus, but what can we equip them with for long-term success, and stay in contact with them for as long as they'll let us, through our app, through our alumni community. And then, what we saw, back to sort of the peer mentorship piece, is that often as guys are about to graduate from the Stonewater program, they are having this immeasurable impact on their peers. And then they aren't really ready to go home. We would say that they need sort of a transitional place before they go home. The families also need a bit more time to learn the tools to reintegrate them into the home. And but there's not always the right fit for a place to send them. And so we are launching the Stonewater Summit Program, which we're so excited about, which is a transitional program with separate living, separate clinical programming, separate academic programming on our campus, but with some really intentional integration points for our summit guys to connect with our residential guys at Stonewater to influence their buy-in, influence their overall trajectory in the program, and then they get so much confidence as well from getting to pour in. One of our values is serve to lead, and so it's this wonderful way for them to kind of look beyond themselves and get that feel good from doing good and pouring into someone else.
Love it. Well, I just want to say again, I've been there twice. I've gotten to know you and Brian and your parents to a degree over the last few
Yeah.
years, and they do amazing work. And I just can't speak highly enough about the Fikeses and Stonewater. And just want to say thank you so much for being here today. And thank you for having me down there twice. And it's always a pleasure to get to see you, even if it's just on a computer screen.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming and for having me here today and asking thoughtful questions. It's just so important for people to, I think see the other side of it and see what leads to these really difficult decisions. And it's nice to hear from other people who've been there. And I've loved getting to know you and your story and all the great work that you guys do too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And before we do go, just tell us, how do we find you and Stonewater?
Yes. So Stonewater, our website is stonewaterrecovery.com, and our team is available. We have, you can reach out to us and we'd love to help you. And we spend a lot of time vetting other adolescent programs as well. So even if it's not for an adolescent boy or even, a young adult, we love to just connect other families with good resources.
Awesome. Well, Elizabeth Fikes, thank you so much for your
Thank
time today, and I look
you.
forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, I'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. If you liked what you heard today or just want to know more, give us a call on 919-670-8119 or visit us at newwatersrecovery.com. Thank you.